Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. Not too long ago I posted a video about did the Greeks know about the Egyptian royal cubit, and well, there's a few layers to that, but for instance cubit rods 523.5 to 529.2 millimeters, but focusing so 523.5 millimeters or 52.36 centimeter. Well, that's the again, links in the description. That's the cubit that was used on the pyramids, the Great Pyramid, Khafre, etc. Other rods have been found, also just by observing the measurements inside, for instance, the Great Pyramid inside and out. This works, and then the question was, as is stated in Herodotus, the Egyptian cubit being equal to the Samian. But what it actually says is their acre is 100 cubits each way and is equal of the Samian acre. So in that video, for instance, I was using the stone of Salamis. Mark Wilson-Jones has published on this as well, and how the Salamis stone is a metrological relief and it encodes several units of measure. And he even specifies royal cubits in here. And then he gives a breadth of the stone, and again you can just overlay that stone on Vitruvian Man. There's also the metrological relief at the Ashmolean Museum, which has the same thing. This image of Vitruvian Man is also in stone. It's a very ancient image, but also in writings such as in the work of Vitruvius, as in Vitruvian Man. And so from that we just to be clear about what the measurements we're talking about. And so the Samian cubit, which Herodotus says is the Egyptian cubit, 526.2222 millimeters based on the dimensions given by Mark Wilson-Jones. And the the pyramid cubit, the Old Kingdom, is 523.5 or 0.6. However, the later, such as the cubit rod of Maya, who was a treasure of Tutankhamun, 526 millimeters. The cubit rod of Turin, again from a later period, roughly 1,000 years after Khafre and that period, that's 526. So the original Old Kingdom cubit, 523, just round that off, and the later cubit, 526 millimeters. So that's we'll just call that Great Pyramid, the Old Kingdom cubit. And now we'll get into, because I want to answer a question in a comment, and we can look, because this also relates to the pendulum and other ancient units. So the meter pendulum, but also the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, this ancient civilization, and their unit of measurement again just corresponds with this. So 523.6 millimeters and 526 millimeters, the later Egyptian royal cube.
So various 1 second pendulums. So for instance, this one is 1 meter long, 1 meter. This is 3.3 feet long, so 1.00584 meters. And this one is 0.994387 meters, or 3.26 feet, except, but they all are quite accurate. Now this is going back to the 1600s, so Meron Mersenne, Riccioli were studying pendulums, and they wanted to find the perfect 1 second timing. 4 quartz crystals, this was a way to keep time. That's why, you know, the principle of a grandfather clock. That's why grandfather clocks, for instance, only have a shallow swing. You should not swing more than 30 degrees, is what was established by Riccioli, because 30 degrees is also a very simple geometry to do from there. But this was the pendulum used 45 degrees north of the equator, because as you go north or south of the equator, it changes the pendulum timing. And this almost become the official unit, the official yard of the US. This was proposed to be the definition of a meter before they moved to the geodetic version, and where we get the more modern meter from. But you can just see with the timing, it is a very accurate 1 second timing. You have to really, well, again, at the position of the Earth. But now we have a 1 metre pendulum, and 1 metre the Fidonian foot. So a Fidonian yard would be 999 millimetres, effectively a metre. The Drusian foot or Belgic foot used in Roman times, 333 millimetres, so a yard would have been a metre. And for instance, the Bavarian and in Tyrol and other places in Europe, the obsolete measures included feet of 333 millimetres, or 1/3 of a metre. Now this is a 1 metre pendulum. Again, you know, you have to keep it within the 30 degrees, but this forms a very accurate pendulum. The weight the weight doesn't matter, it's the centre of gravity. So it's 1 metre to the centre of gravity. The weight of a pendulum doesn't affect it, it's the length that affects the pendulum. So I have different weighted pendulums here in different sizes, but we're always going to get the 1 second. But what's nice is that the 1 metre pendulum, 30 degrees of arc, therefore this has to be pi over, so the arc of 30 degrees has to be pi over 6 metres, which is one Egyptian royal cubit has used on the pyramids, the Great Pyramid, Khafre, and the others as well, Old Kingdom Egyptian royal cubit. Now we come to this pendulum, 3.3 feet, which is 3 Saxon yards, as was used just before the introduction of the modern imperial units. And there have been rulers found, and also in the street plans, for instance, in places like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, the ancient Indus civilization. For instance, 33 feet is the standard there, or 10 of their yards. Okay, so also the Royal Babylonian foot of 1.1 foot, therefore a yard of 3.3. But what we have again is an ancient unit of measure which corresponds to allegedly modern units of measure, just as with the allegedly modern metre. And again, this 3.3 feet pendulum forms a very accurate 1 second pendulum. But as where this arc is 523.6 millimetres, or pi over 6 metres, because this is slightly longer, the arc has to be slightly longer, and the arc is 526.6 millimetres, or 0.52665 metres, which is 1.7278596 feet, which is splitting hairs from the canonical cubit of 1.728 feet, which is 6 over 5 cubed. But at 526.6 millimetres, again it's a fraction of a millimetre from the Maya rod. Maya, the treasure of Tutankhamun, also the cubit rod in the Turin Museum is 526 millimetres. This is this 1 second pendulum, based on the Mohenjo-Daro and antiquated units of measure, gives us a cubit, the later Egyptian cubit, and the allegedly modern metre. 1 second pendulum gives us the Old Kingdom cubit. Now, another interesting point is that the Egyptian cubit was divided into 7, so it was like 1, 2, 3 palm, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So their foot, which is also corresponds from your wrist to your elbow, is 5.6 millimetres shorter than the modern English foot of 12 inches. And the difference between a metre and this pendulum is exactly that number too, and it is well, again, a fraction of a millimetre from being that. So the difference between the Egyptian foot, or 4 palm, or 16 fingers, is it works now either way. Just so happens that in the Old Kingdom they had a unit of measure. So the gold debon was 13.6 grams, the copper debon was 27.3 grams. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are also using weights which went 6.8 grams, 13.6 grams, and 27.3 grams in there. and this straight line is 20. So from here to here is 27.3 fingers on the imperial scale, and this arc on this 16% from the Mersan-Riccioli is 27.33 fingers as well. It's the way that these fingers sort of work together. So this was in response to, I just recently did a video on, did the Egyptians, did the Greeks have the cubit? Well, the answer was no, they weren't using the Egyptian royal cubit of a pyramid, but they were using this cubit. So one Maya rod or Egyptian cubit is a Samian cubit, as in Pythagoras of Samos. So it's different cultures, always nice number correlations, allegedly antiquated measures. Meters being used before meters were invented, including this sort of modern meter as well. And it's just a symphony of coincidence, how time, geometry, and astronomy comes in, because I want to come back to this, because what you have in here, the geometry which is needed to build these, also encodes just a storm of coincidence when it comes to the geometry of Sun, Earth, Moon, but also the planets as well. As it relates to Bode's law, but you can actually correct Bode's law by doing it by looking at the metre and the yard, and that will come back into that. But it's how these things, it is what it is. Egyptian royal cubit, 1 metre pendulum, Old Kingdom, Egyptian cubit, 1 Saxon yard or Mohenjo-Daro yard gives us the 526 millimetre Maya rod or Turin cubit. So there it is.
So coming back to that earlier look at the Samian cubit, how it corresponds to the cubit rod of Maya, treasurer of Tutankhamun, or the cubit rod of Turin at 526 millimeters. A little bit, but enough to be significant difference from the Old Kingdom Royal Egyptian cubit, such as used in the Great Pyramids and other places. But how does that nicely join up? So as we saw with that demo, but the pendulum of 3.3 feet, 5.84 millimeters longer than a meter, is equivalent to a Saxon yard of 3 feet, or 3 Mohenjo-Daro / Harappa / Indus Valley feet, or 3 Babylonian royal feet. Now the Babylonian royal foot, a little bit iffy, because there is a little, it's particularly difficult in that, but the Sumerian foot as well, what people have pointed out as well. But that, so 1.1 English feet is a Sumer or a Saxon or a Mohenjo-Daro Harappa foot. But either way, the 3.3 feet there, the arc at that 30 degrees is 526.6 mils, which is a fraction of a millimeter from the canonical cubit of 1.728 feet, or 6/5 cubed, which gives us a cubit rod of Maya, or the cubit rod of Turin. While the 1 meter 1 second pendulum, again 30 degrees being so important, has to keep at a shallow arc, but at 1 meter, therefore 1/12 of the circumference of the circle with a 1 meter radius, and then that has to be pi/6 meters, or 1 Egyptian royal cubit as used in the pyramids and the Old Kingdom. So we have just again a nice connection between multiple sets, groupings of measurement, and how it's a symphony of pure coincidence, or there is some sort of connection. Travel through these. Now, my personal thoughts on it is that before a civilization can develop, you need a merchant class, which relies on administration, record keeping, standard units of weights and measures, Because they're travelling, they need to have their navigation, therefore their astronomy and mathematics and geometry in order in those features. So that's my personal thoughts on it. Even when a civilization collapses, a mercantile class will continue, and that's, you know, my Occam's razor on the where did it originate and how was it preserved and why did it travel through time, because it's a lot of other uh, civilizations, areas across the world where you'll find these very curious similarities, very curious coincidences between, let's just call it sacred number, weights and measures, and how they join together. Anyway, with that, have a good one.